Hi, I'm Jill Santiago, Director for the Center for Social Justice and Human Understanding, a nonprofit organization at Suffolk County Community College. Today I'm sitting down with Karl Grossman, journalist, professor, and author of several books on Long Island history, to discuss Robert Moses and his influence on the landscape of Long Island. Karl, thank you for sitting down with me today.
A pleasure, Jill.
Thank you. We're talking about this rather controversial man who a lot of our students don't really know very much about. And I'm really, looking forward to our conversation. But before we get started, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge all of the work that you have done to work on issues of social justice, your involvement in civil rights on Long Island. And before we get into our subject today, I would love to know what got you involved in that work, where your passion comes from.
Well, a lot of it is occupational. As a college student, I went to Antioch College in Ohio. I got an internship at a newspaper in Cleveland. And this is a corny story. Above the entrance of the Cleveland Press was its motto, "Give people the light and they'll find their own way." And I was just a copy boy there. But in seeing how the group of investigative reporters functioned with horror stories, I mean, as a copy boy, sometimes I was put on the night shift and I got these calls from people with all kind of, horror stories, unjust situations. And I would write a memo and give the details to these investigative reporters. And amazingly to me, the publication, the documentation and publication of what those folks had told me resolved the problem about half the time. And so I came back to where I'm from, New York, and decided I was going to become an investigative reporter. And I've been that for many decades, and indeed teach it. I'm a professor of journalism at SUNY College at Old Westbury. And every semester now for 43 years at the college, I teach investigative reporting. And also there's a bit of a religious, probably more than a bit of a religious tie-in. I'm Jewish, and there's a great vision in Judaism to, Isaiah said, I have the line here, and this is biblical, "Let the oppressed be free. Break off every yoke, share your bread with the hungry. Take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, clothe him." And particularly among Reform Jews, there's this great tradition of trying to deal with social injustice.
Well, I'm really grateful for your work and everything that you've done here to really help to change what Long Island looks like through your reporting and obviously through your role as an educator here. So the focus of our conversation, as I said, is Robert Moses today. This is obviously a name that students are going to recognize because of the beach and because of the causeway, but they probably don't know very much else about him. So to start off, could you give us a little bit of background information on this really incredible, complicated individual?
Well, the first job I got as a reporter was out on Long Island in Babylon, where Moses lived. And it was my first week of work, and the publisher of the newspaper, James Cooper, told me he'd like to have me go to Fire Island. Never been to Fire Island. I'm from the city, grew up in Brooklyn and Queens, and write a story about what Moses' plan for a 4-lane highway on Fire Island would do to Fire Island. And I went and I visited some of these magical communities on Fire Island. So unique, so unusual. And I went to Sunken Forest and observed some of this wonderful nature on Fire Island. It was clear to me that a road would just cover all that with cement. And I began doing a series over a 2-year period of stories about the would-be Moses Road and an alternative, a Fire Island National Seashore. And finally, in 1964, established was a Fire Island National Seashore, and Moses was stopped. And my journalism actually played a part in that. And then just add to the story, Moses resigned from all his various state authority and commission positions in a kind of a contest of wills with Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor. He thought if he threatened to resign, the state of New York couldn't continue. And then Rockefeller wouldn't take his bait. The state of New York did continue. He resigned from all these posts, but he left. It was a private enterprise, the 1964-1965 World's Fair. And there was a lot of protests in this New York area to the kind of hiring, very, very racist hiring, done by Moses with his World's Fair. And when the World's Fair opened in 1964, I went there with people from the NAACP and Congress of Racial Equality from Long Island, who, after they got through the gates in, took out placards and started demonstrating. And wow, did these private guards come after it was bloody. It was like being in Alabama.
Wow.
But it was in New York. And I wrote a big story to the newspaper. The Babylon Leader had been sold a few months before to a chain. And for this chain of newspapers that circulated on Long Island, I wrote a story about, it was like, I think the headline was Long Island contingent goes to the jail pavilion. I'm just paraphrasing, but something like that. In any case, get a call after the story came out from the newspaper chain that bought the newspaper. I had been on it for a couple of years. And I went to their office, their headquarters in Bayshore on Long Island. And I remember the guy was Wilson Stringer, the associate vice president of the chain, said that Mr. Moses has called. He's very upset with your story.
Oh, wow.
You're fired. So that was also a taste for me about, well, how Moses really had a hold on media in the New York area.
Absolutely. I believe, in New York Times reporting, it took many, many years before they reported anything negative about him.
Well, as Robert Caro, who authored, this is a 1974 classic book, The Power Broker.
Yes.
He had a handle on the media of the New York metro area. The exception was this little Babylon Leader in his Long Island, where he had a home on Long Island, which let me do the journalism that needed to be done. They were joined, incidentally, we were joined by the Suffolk County News and then the Long Island Commercial Review, 3 newspapers challenging the Moses Road, advocating for a national seashore. And like what I witnessed at the Cleveland Press, half the time things work out when the press can be very powerful. The pen can be very powerful. And TV can be powerful too. What can be accomplished through investigative journalism?
So you mentioned the racist hiring practices that were involved in the World Trade Fair, but before we go there, I wanted to ask you about the environmental impacts. I know how committed you are to the environment and those causes. So what were some of the impacts of these various projects that he did, both in New York City and out here? What were the impacts there?
Well, he didn't give much of a damn about the environment, though here on Long Island, what he was able to do was to build highways, and a lot of them connect to a park. So then he was able to call them parkways.
Right.
Parkways. His big road was the biggest parking lot in the world, probably, the Long Island Expressway. So again, not giving a damn about the environment particularly, but loving highways and cars, even though the guy never drove.
Yeah, he never learned to drive, and also didn't really care for public transportation either. It's a kind of a curious combination of things for mass transit.
Well, he perverted mass transit in the New York metro area. I mean, we should have had a mix of there's a train system, the Long Island Railroad, for what it's worth. But we should have had many other monorail and trolleys and trams and a good bus system. But Moses was able to direct the resources of New York State into highways,
Right.
more and more highways, just kind of loved roads.
Yeah, I really love the concept of getting people where they wanted to be as quickly and as efficiently as possible, but really didn't care very much about not only the environment, but the people that were going to be uprooted many times in the creation of those roads.
Oh yeah, if you go to Manhattan in particular, you'll see highways that were built that demolished often ethnic neighborhoods.
Right.
Roads that Moses built, and here it wasn't just trees and streams that he didn't give a damn about, but people, particularly people of color,
Right.
brown and black people.
So when we think about the pervasive nature of racism and segregation on Long Island, we rarely acknowledge that in many ways it was done intentionally, right? It was done by design. Can you talk about how he fits into this shameful history?
Yeah, well, he's not alone. When America's, at that point, biggest development began in Levittown, there was a prohibition against people of color getting a house. I mean, you had to be Caucasian. And then, I mean, shameful, absolutely shameful. But Moses was shameful in his kind of crazy ways. For example, if a viewer, next time the viewer might be on Southern State Parkway, looks at the bridges, the overpasses, you'll see they're only about 11, 12, sometimes 13 or 14 feet, a few of them high.
And why is that?
Why is that? It's because Moses didn't want buses carrying people of color from New York City to take Southern State. Buses aren't allowed on Southern because of the overpasses. Trucks aren't allowed too, but buses wouldn't be allowed, and that was Moses' big concern, to go to his beloved Jones Beach State Park. He didn't want black people, didn't want Latino people, and so he built the bridges low. Again, very typical of Moses. Long Island itself is among the most segregated. You wouldn't think that this island east of New York City, 120 miles long, right there off New York City, but in fact, Long Island was a major center for slavery. The racism goes way, way back. It was one of the big areas. And this isn't Alabama or Mississippi. This is Long Island, New York, of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
The Ku Klux Klan dominated politics on Long Island. The housing pattern is shameful. We have ghettos on Long Island, Wyandanch and Gordon Heights and North Amityville, where in more recent years, Brentwood to a large degree, and other areas, Brentwood for Latino people, Gordon Heights, Wyandanch, North Amityville, and so forth, for African American people. And thus our educational system is all but segregated. I mean, a young person would go to high school, which will be 97% white or 99% or almost 100% white, while an African American going to Wyandanch High School, which is largely African American, or you go to Brentwood High School, largely. This is not right, and it's poor in terms of education. I mean, people, I feel rather strongly. I went to high school in Queens, Andrew Jackson High School, which in fact was diverse, with lots of black students, and I'm Jewish, there was a good Jewish component, but lots of Christians there, and we got to know each other. And to me, that's the way integration can be. True integration can be so nicely created, formed, by people getting to know people from different backgrounds. I'm a professor at, as I mentioned, SUNY College at Old Westbury, which was purposely designed for a mix of black students and white students and Latino students and Asian American students and foreign students. And
so exactly the opposite of the way that Long Island has been designed.
oh yeah, well, at SUNY Old Westbury, because I teach television there, and print and other things, as I say, investigative reporting, environmental journalism. That Fire Island story got me very heavily into environmental journalism. But when I teach television, I have the students put together a documentary, and I say, what do you think about this idea? Let's do a documentary on Old Westbury, where peoples mix. And all they have to do is interview each other and say that I never knew black kids before now.
That's right. I think about that many times in our college classrooms, even here at Suffolk County Community College. It's the same situation as you're seeing at Old Westbury, in that a student may come from a completely white high school, and it's the first time that they're sitting down in a classroom with people who don't look like them, and it's amazing.
Yeah, well, I'll start the semester, and there'll be 2 doctors' wives from Great Neck, and then there'll be 3 kids from Wyandanch, and there'll be a couple of Chinese American students from Flushing, and they're all like sitting with each other, and a few Latino kids from Spanish Harlem. By the second week, I mean, this has been my experience, and I've been there since 1978. By the second week, a doctor's wife is sitting next to one of the Chinese American students, and one of the black kids is sitting next to one of the Latino. It's also our faculty is similarly diverse, and our administration is diverse. Our president is an African American. Dr. Sams went to Morehouse. He formerly worked at Morehouse. So integration, it isn't a fantasy. It can be when people get to know other people. And because of individuals like Robert Moses, people wouldn't get to know other people, wouldn't learn about other people, wouldn't feel for other people, and see like we're all human beings, let's get along.
Sure. I want to point out Robert Moses was Jewish, and yet really rejected that aspect of his life. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, he not only had a problem with African American people and with Latino people, he switched from being, he came from a Jewish family in New Haven, Connecticut. And after college, he became an Episcopalian, and he remained an Episcopalian through his life. Indeed, Christopher Verga, who teaches here at Suffolk Community, teaches history. And I just co-authored a book with Chris on Cold War Long Island. He dug into some of the Moses archives, and he found in one box a bunch of letters written by rabbis to Moses, saying that his attitude towards blacks in New York City was kind of like the Nazis, their attitude towards Jews. Moses curtly responded, and there is the letter in the archive. I'm Episcopalian, I'm not Jewish.
Which is really, it's an incredible irony here.
Well, and then he stopped responding to the pleas of the rabbis.
So you're bringing up this comparison that these rabbis made to what was happening in Nazi Germany. And yet, as I'm sure you're aware, there's a larger-than-life statue of Robert Moses in his hometown here on Long Island in Babylon. And what are your thoughts on that? I mean, we've lived through the last year and a half or 2 years where there's been plenty of civil unrest in this country, and many statues that have been dedicated to people who have less than favorable histories have been destroyed. So what are your thoughts about that statue dedicated to Robert Moses?
To glorify with a statue, it's a big bronze statue too.
Yes.
Robert Moses in Babylon, or to frankly name it the bridge that connects to Fire Island. Thankfully, it doesn't go anywhere if it gets to Robert Moses Bridge. It stops, and there's a little Robert Moses Park, but there's no road from, thankfully, Fire Island is still a roadless paradise, a kind of barefoot paradise.
Yes.
Great vacation spot. And there's a bill, let me just read right from the bill. There's a bill before the New York State Legislature right now as we speak. A prime author of the bill is Daniel O'Donnell, who's actually from Long Island, from Comac originally. He's the brother of Rosie O'Donnell.
Oh, okay.
And he's a lawyer. And I'm just reading from his bill. The bill calls for a commission to be set up to choose a new name for Robert Moses State Park. And let me just have it right in front of me. How Moses wielded unprecedented power during his decades-long career. And let me just insert how he wielded such power. He ran for governor of New York State in 1934 against Herbert Lehman. It was a disastrous loss. So he figured the way to achieve power, to seize power, would be to create these commissions and authorities and kind of as a super bureaucrat be able to wield power.
Yeah, and at any given time, he held numerous positions across the state and in Long Island. And I understand that when he lost that election, it was due to the fact that he just could not interact with people in a way that was going to make him, make him electable.
Oh yeah, no, in fact, I once took a photograph. Well, there was a hearing on the Fire Island road plan, and I, with my camera, ran up to him, and here he was sitting, looked like a mafioso with sunglasses, with a sneer. Took a photo, got an award for that photo, and it was, I've got the caption. John Marr was the editor of the Babylon Leader. The caption he wrote was, "Moses hearing at the hearing?" ? Because he looked so uninterested, disinterested, in fact, like kind of spiteful in regard to the people who were speaking. In any case, this bill, which is before the legislature now, and I wish it would pass, calls for a commission to choose a new name for Robert Moses State Park. The bill, Robert Moses repeatedly abuses his power to entrench racial and economic segregation. When Robert Moses helped construct Jones Beach State Park, he intentionally ordered the overpasses of the connecting parkway too low for buses so that poor people, particularly African-American families, could not access the beach. Further, as commissioner of the New York City Department of Parks and Recreations, that was another bureaucratic hat
that he had.
Moses built most public parks, playgrounds, and pools far from Puerto Rican and African-American neighborhoods. He revised the language in a city contract that effectively allowed for the discrimination against black veterans and their families in the Stuyvesant Town development. This is in Manhattan. And what's written in this bill is the state of New York needs to begin the process of accounting for the historic harm done to communities of color by people like Robert Moses. As to that statue, there have been people on the street in Babylon marching in recent times to get rid of that statue. I mean, we've seen these statues of Robert E. Lee and others, leaders of this, the segregated South, of the Confederacy being taken down. If those statues are taken down because they reflect a very dark side of American history, slavery, the statue of Moses, who reflects a very dark side, the history of racism on Long Island, should be removed.
I agree. My question is, as this bill says, we need to begin the process, right? The process begins with recognition that this is our history, that this is a part of our shameful history, and it is ingrained in our culture here. So what do we do about that? How do you unravel? How do you begin to change systems that have been in place, roadways and our school system? How do you even begin to change that to make Long Island a less racist, more inclusive place?
Well, education is critical. In fact, that's why there's this big uproar about, what they call critical racist history in the United States. We're talking about Long Island, but I remember when I was in Antioch College, there was a program in Mexico, and I took a Greyhound bus to the border, and then actually with a roommate, I made arrangements. He would take my motorcycle down to Harlingen, Texas. He had been stationed at the Air Force Base that had been in Harlingen, probably still is. And I kind of put it back together, and I would drive off into Mexico. In any case, I woke up in the Greyhound bus on the way to Harlingen in Dallas, Texas. And here I'm from New York, and I grew up in St. Albans, Queens, which is, all kind of people. And in this Greyhound bus station in Dallas, I saw for the first time in my life segregation. I mean, I jumped out of the bus. It was the morning. We'd gone through the night, and there's a colored, water fountain. It's like black and white people can't drink from the same, and colored restaurant and colored restroom. And I mean, and people walking around with their white hats. These, it was Texas, so they were kind of not only racist but cowboys, with kind of an attitude. And black people, I don't know, you can kind of feel the subjugation. And it was the first time I saw South Africa in America. It was 1960, a long time ago, but it's not over. It's not over. Racism still. So education is very important. Seeing as much as you can the cost, the price, the burden of racism, and then action. People have to act. In fact, my roommate, Ted Gertzel, who went off and became a professor, like me, his roommate at Rutgers, Ted was from a Quaker family. Father was Quaker, his mother was Jewish, actually. He was born in a Nazi camp during World War II. Ted was like in the blink of an eye, headed right for that colored restaurant. It was like, we have to act.
Sure.
Like the folks who, on that World's Fair opening day, even though many were left bloodied, and again, I photographed these people left bloodied, black and white people left bloodied by these private cops with their clubs. People have to act. People should get involved today. I believe strongly in. We're on Long Island. There's chapters all over Long Island of the NAACP, an historic and wonderful civil rights organization. If somebody on Long Island is Latino or Latinx, where I live on Eastern Long Island, there's a group, OLA, OLA for Eastern Long Island, led by a great woman, Minerva Perez, and they act. They're moving. They're acting, so I think you need education, and then people need to act to end this. And some of the action has to be governmental or political, like the bill that's been introduced in the state legislature to get rid of the name of Robert Moses State Park. And some of it has to be like in relation to the Robert Moses statue in Babylon. People marching, people demonstrating. It made all the difference. As a journalist, the civil rights struggle on Long Island was part of the stuff that I covered. And there was so much to do, and there's so much that was done, and there's so much that needs to be done on Long Island and everywhere to combat, to challenge discrimination and racism.
Thank you. Thank you for having this conversation with me, for educating our students. I know I learned a lot today listening to you, and I know that they will as well. And I'm just grateful, as I said in the beginning of this, for your work, for your commitment, and for doing your part to change and make this world a better place. So thank you very much.
A pleasure, Jim.
Thank you.